So every year, just about, we did miss 1 year, August, we set aside to do apologetics. And the reason that we do that is because if you look at the statistics, between the ages of 18 and 22, about 70% of people leave the church. And that has been a fact for over a decade. And that's just been about the rate that people leave. And so people have tried to look at that and been like, what does the church do about this? But what no one really did until recently is to have somebody go in and say, well, why? What's the why that so many people between the ages of 18 and 22 leave the church? Now, I will tell you that of that 70% that leave, about 32% of them actually end up returning sometime after 22, but it still leaves a large part that just disappear. And so what they found is that they interviewed these people that left the church and asked them why. And 65% of the people who left the church had the same answer. And the answer was that the church didn't have the answer to hard questions. The answer was that when they would go to school, the school said, we know this, and we know this, and we know this. And they'd go to church and they'd say, well, the Bible says this. And then they would go to their pastor, they'd go to their Sunday school teachers, they'd go to their parents, and they'd say, well, if the schools are telling this and they have facts to back it up, and the church is telling this and it seems to contradict, like, how do I know which one's true? And the general answer of most of the people that they would ask was either, well, you just have to have faith and just trust, or they would do worse and say something like, well, some things like if they said, well, people say that the earth is billions of years old and talk about evolution and stuff like that. And then they'd say, well, Genesis is more of a poetic book and it's not, don't take everything so literal. We'll figure this out, whatever. And then they just kind of brush them off. And what happens is they go, the people who are anti-God know what they're talking about. And the church has no clue what they're talking about. So who do they put their trust in? And so what I committed to do was every year we would take the month of August and we would do apologetics. Now we would do it and we'd split it. Usually there's 4 weeks in August. There's usually 4 weeks in a month. This month we have 5. So I don't know what we'll do on the 5th. Might do something fun. We'll see. But what I try to do is do 2 weeks of practical apologetics and 2 weeks of existential apologetics. Now, if you're wondering what the difference is, practical would be things like evolution versus creationism. Existential would be more like, if God is good, why do people suffer? So you see the difference between the two? Well, today we are going to do one of my favorite topics, and we're going to do a practical apologetics. And so somebody shout out, what is your favorite movie? Man, I should know my people better than to ask questions like that. Okay, everybody, no, I'm not even going to do it. I'm setting myself up again. What's my favorite movie? Jurassic Park. And it is not up for debate that Jurassic Park is the best movie ever made. Because if you think so, I can prove you wrong. And the answer is this. I got a wife out of that movie. So that is the first movie Tina and I ever saw together. It's just the right amount of scary that I could be a man, but that she still needed to hold my arm and snuggle close. You know what I'm saying? So it's fantastic. That movie came out in 93. That's when we actually met and started dating. And so it was just the perfect movie. I have lots of good things with it. But I'm going to tell you right now, my favorite movie is part of the problem. And it's actually part of the reason why people are leaving the church. What is the byline of my favorite movie? It's an adventure, 65 million years in the making. And it is things like that that are just said as though they are absolutely true over and over, but they're actually lies. Because it didn't take them 65 million years to make that movie. They did it with CGI. No, and the problem is that the earth is not that old. And we just continually have people that just say it like it's fact. And the church is afraid to touch that topic very often. And the thing that has really been a problem for both Christians actually and evolutionists is dinosaurs. Dinosaurs actually create a large problem pretty much for everybody who's trying to prove anything. They're very problematic, except for children. They love them. But Christians as a whole have studied dinosaurs far less, leaving us with much greater problems. Because in order to believe the Bible as a literal book, which I'm going to tell you, you should, we have to believe that the Genesis account of creation and the following genealogies that are listed are accurate. And that means that the earth is somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 years old. Now, I know that leaves a 2,000 year discrepancy, but that's because their records weren't quite as accurate as we like to keep now. But that is a far cry from 65 million or billions and billions of years, as some will have you take it. But this is where dinosaurs come in. In order to believe the Genesis account of creation and that the earth is only 6,000 to 8,000 years old, dinosaurs must have coexisted with people. But we are told that that is not the case. It would also mean that there would have to be evidence of a worldwide flood, which would have to show up in the fossil records. It would mean that fossils have to be being dated wrong by scientists over and over and over again, and them not admitting that they're wrong or not knowing that they're wrong. And if dinosaurs were present during this time, they should be listed in the Bible. So we're going to talk about all of those. The first is, when did dinosaurs live? Well, as stated by Jurassic Park and evolutionists, they declare that dinosaurs died out about 65 million years ago. But again, that would contradict a biblical view of creation, which puts the earth between 6,000 and 8,000 years old. I've heard some people go as old as 10,000 years. I'm willing to say okay to that, but I'm going to say 6,000 to 8,000. But according to creation, God made sea and air creatures on day 5 and beasts of the land on day 6. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 through 25, it says, "Then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the 5th day. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and the beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." In Genesis 1:21, when we read that it says, basically there were things in the water, the word that's translated there is the word tanium. That's Tanniym in the Hebrew. And some people will translate that as a whale. Like you will see that in the King James Version, I believe it says whale. Some will say a great fish. But a better translation would actually be sea monster. And you'll see I have up here the Strong's definition of it, which is that it's a marine or land monster. That is a sea serpent or a jackal. I don't know what jackal. That's like a weird, but I mean, that's in there. A dragon, a sea monster, serpent, or whale. Now, why does Strong's put whale in there? Because Strong's did not want to contradict the King James Version of the Bible, so they put that it could be translated as whale. But whale is a very bad translation of that word. It is consistently, looking up there, some sort of sea serpent or dragon. Think like a water dragon. I'm going to tell you a little bit of something. If anyone ever saw Jurassic World, the largest dinosaur that's in that movie is the one that comes up out of the water and eats the other dinosaurs and then goes back down to the water. The depiction of that in that movie is a mosasaur. That mosasaurs grow to about 50 feet in length, and they have been found off of every single continent in the world. There's also another animal that swims in the water that we know of called a plesiosaur. They also grow more than 50 feet, and they have a long neck. If you've ever seen like a brachiosaur or something, they're like that, but they swim. And but the mosasaur sounds more like a sea dragon to me. But anyways, that's what the word tanio means. And God used that word in creation. Now, beasts of the land, he just says beasts. Well, that would be pretty much everything on the land that's not cattle, because he differentiated cattle. But that would include land dinosaurs. And then also it mentions flying birds. And the word for birds is just anything that flaps and covered with wings. So that could also include all kinds of like pterosaurs and things like that. So each animal was made according to its kind. And Noah brought animals according to their kind on the ark. In Genesis 6:19-21, it says, "And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be made male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you and to keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them." So, dinosaurs also had to be on the ark. And one of the first questions people have is, how could dinosaurs fit on the ark? People always wonder already, how do you fit all of the animals on the ark? Well, the easiest way to understand that is to actually go to the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, and they show you how it works. I can tell you that people have figured it out, that there was plenty of space for each kind of animal on the ark. But as far as dinosaurs go, people are like, but they're huge, right? Well, mammal babies are significantly bigger than reptile babies. And dinosaurs would be much more like reptiles. In fact, they're reptiles. They're not exactly reptiles. There's a difference in the legs of a reptile and a dinosaur, but basically they're reptiles. The absolute largest dinosaur that we know of is a Diplodocus. And a Diplodocus weighs about 16 tons. When it is born, it is the size of a football, about that big. Most are actually much smaller. Most other dinosaurs are significantly smaller when born, like chick-sized. And so after a year of growth, after 1 year, how big would be a Diplodocus? Again, the largest. It would be smaller than a sheep. There are about 60 kinds of dinosaurs total. That's it. There's only about 60 kinds. You could easily fit 60 animals in the ark that are this big. It's not a problem. In fact, this is how most of the animals, like when we depict Noah's Ark, we see him parading like full-grown elephants and full-grown giraffes and stuff into the ark. Like that would be kind of ridiculous. It says actually the animals came to him. God brought the animals. He most likely brought either baby or infant ones that would grow to their first year to be ready to go for when the ark finished. And how would they have all been fed? Well, the answer is that they all had vegetarian diets. First of all, before the fall, everything was created to be vegetarian. But since most of the animals that were on the ark were probably babies already, they wouldn't have been on meat to begin with. All mammals start off with milk. And then you can easily introduce other types of foods, but it's a while before they actually get to eating meat. So it's not a problem. T-Rex, not a problem. He wouldn't go around just eating everybody on the on the ark. He was probably well contained and well small. It's not a problem. There's also no indication in the Bible, there is indication in the Bible that animals actually had no issues with people until after the flood, that all animals were tame until sometime after the flood. I don't know if you realize that, but in Genesis 9:2, it actually says, "In the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth, on every bird of the air, and on all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand." One of the things that happened after the flood is that God made it so that there was now fear of man put into animals. Prior to that, man and animals didn't have problems. They got along. Then it became to where they don't get along. But that's a different lesson. So what happened to the dinosaurs? There aren't any now, so isn't that proof of evolution? There are no species that would have led up to the dinosaurs. We have no record and no idea of anything of what would have become a dinosaur. And there is no evolutionary trace of where they came from or where they went. There's nothing to say that this is what a dinosaur would have become. Pterosaurs are flying reptiles. And they would have been created on day 5 with the flying creatures. And pterosaurs have this retractable pteroid bone on the fold of each wing. And it means that they can basically pop their wings up and walk around on the bottom of their wings. They use that when they walk on land, which is weird that they walk on land, but they do. It also allows them, when they're flying, to adjust their wings so that they can control their flight at very low speeds. It's apparently hard to stay in the air the slower you go. But because of the way their bone structure is, they could do it. There is no other creature on the earth built like that. There is nothing that has that feature that could have come to that or something that would come after it. They're the only things in existence with that feature. There are 0 evolutionary transitional fossils found from dinosaurs. There's nothing that was like, well, this was a dinosaur and then it slowly became this, slowly became this, slowly became this, and now you have alligators or something like that. There is nothing. There is 0 evolutionary transitionals, anything found about dinosaurs. In 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted, and it destroyed thousands of acres, covering it in lava, and that lava turned into rock. And scientists estimated, based on all of their science that they knew and understanding in the 80s, that it would take 100 years for growth to take off, and then it would take another 100 years before it could sustain life. They estimated in 1980 that Mount St. Helens would be uninhabitable for 200 years. Within 30 years of that explosion, the area was so replete with vegetation and animals that it was impossible to tell that the eruption ever occurred. Scientists do not have a good track record of accuracy. In 2020, we got a phrase that became popular: trust the science. And I'm going to tell you right now, science gets it wrong more often than they get it right. But nobody wants to admit that. They change their minds. They will say it's this way. A decade later, they go, well, no, it's actually this way. And a decade later, it's this way. And it will constantly change based on new evidence, new findings, new worldviews, new all kind of things. There is not a good track record within science of getting things right. Many modern scientists that support intelligent design over evolution have been blackballed from their communities, and almost all scientists through the early 1900s were all creationists. If I started listing some of the most famous scientists in the world, people like Isaac Newton, they believed in literal 6-day creation. They believed in young earth. Like all the scientists that gave us all the breakthrough up until sometime in the 1900s, all were creationists. All used the Bible as their foundation. Now, what about the Ice Age? Well, in Genesis 13:10, it's kind of a weird scripture for this, but we'll see where we're going with this. It says, Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. When you think of the Middle East, what do you think of? Desert. It's desert. But here it was well watered. It was like the garden of the Lord. Now, here's what happened. The earth got covered in water. Flood, global flood. As flood waters evaporate, what happens to temperatures? It cools down. The evaporative, like we build air conditioners off of this process, right? Evaporative coils and things. Evaporation causes things to cool. A global flood would have cooled the earth into an ice age. As the ice melted, the places that would have first melted would be deserts, the hot areas. And as those places watered, that's where like a lot of the animals would have gone to. That would have been their best habitation, like the well-watered places. But then as those dried up, their habitats changed. And so what we find is that most of the deserts were very temperate with much water immediately after the flood. But as the ice age rescinded, their habitats changed dramatically. And as the lands dried, so did the dinosaurs' habitats. They had to move on and try to find places where they could survive because the earth was changing very rapidly. There was an actual ice age that did happen. We have evidence of it. And the Bible supports it through the global flood. And what happened is, again, so much change in the habitats caused a lot of change in the way animals were. Now, if we had dinosaurs on the earth with people, and if dinosaurs were on the ark, and they survived the flood, where are they now? Well, there are glyphs in China, the Middle East, the Americas, Antarctica, that indicate dinosaurs. Now, they didn't have internet when we discovered all these glyphs and drawings. So they weren't able to tell people, look what we find, and other people could have copied them. But people are finding the same animals, looking the same, drawn all over the world, without people communicating to each other what they found. What does that tell you? That people made it up? No, it tells you that people were seeing something, that they had seen these things. And their drawings indicate people and dinosaurs together. Lots of drawings that show people with dinosaurs. St. George is reported to have slain a dragon in the Middle East in AD 200. The Chinese zodiac features dragons alongside standard animals. But where are they getting these dragons from? From 1405 AD, this is written in a journal. It says, close to the town of Bures, I don't know, near Sudbury, there has lately appeared to the great hurt of the countryside a dragon, vast in body, with a crested head, teeth like a saw, a tail extending to an enormous length. Having slaughtered the shepherd of the flock, it devoured many sheep. In order to destroy him, all the country people were summoned. But when the dragon saw that he was again to be assailed with arrows, he fled into a marsh or mere, and there hid himself among the long reeds, and was seen no more. And what animal can survive, because it says, saw that he was again to be assailed with arrows? He's already been shot with arrows multiple times. It now takes an entire countryside of people to come after this animal, and they call it a dragon. What are they seeing here? Well, we don't know exactly, but why are all these things written? Marco Polo, not the guy that the swimming pool game was named after, but the actual explorer, Marco Polo, he described an encounter with a dragon in China during the Middle Ages. And there are more than 20 ceratopsian dinosaur designs. Ceratopsian would be like a triceratops, but maybe you see some with many different, more than three, less than three horns. There are more than 20 ceratopsian dinosaur designs, many with lots of horns encircling the head that greatly resemble the drawings of Chinese dragons. Where are the dinosaurs today? We see evidence of them through history all the way up to like the 1600s into the Middle Ages. What about today? Well, they went extinct the same way almost all animals have gone extinct. Loss of habitat, people hunting them. Some people say that dinosaurs were not discovered until the late 1800s, as there's no mention of that word before that time. Well, That's because until 1842, people called them dragons. And every time in literature where we see dragons, we change that to dinosaur. The word dinosaur was not invented in the until 1842, and the whole reason it was made was to classify them as saurian reptiles. That's where dinosaurs from saurian. Saurian reptile is a genus species. So we get a saurian reptile. And it was just to be a descriptive term that was more descriptive than the word dragon. Dragon did not indicate where it would fall within species. Now, dinosaur fossils and the problems that they create. I know I said this would be a little bit different sermon. There's not a lot of scripture. When you get into some of these things, it's hard to get some of the stuff from the Bible, but it's, again, these are the answers to hard questions. And I think it's important that we understand these things. So, dinosaur fossils. When a scientist has to answer a question of something they don't know, what you do is you construct a model to figure it out, and from there, you create a hypothesis in order to test and see if what you think is true is actually true. Now, when you build a model, you will always build your model based on your worldview. And that's not just a thing like scientists do that. Creationists do it too. It's everybody. Everybody looks at everything according to your worldview. And evidence is always interpreted according to your worldview. Basically whatever you believe is going to influence how you interpret evidence. Now, dinosaur fossils are almost always found in bone beds, mixed in with all types of other mammals, reptiles, and birds. Most of which they would say would be much more modern. We know better. But some of these dinosaur beds extend for miles. Creationists have a very simple answer to this. We had a worldwide flood that deposited large collections of remains in the same area. Evolutionists attribute this to large localized floods that happened wherever each one of these dinosaur beds are, that caused rivers to violently overflow its riverbanks and then basically distribute large amounts of sand and earth into similar locations, and the bones went with them. Evolution was not a theory until 1859. Until then, basically no one would have believed that the earth was older than 6,000 to 9,000 years old. Not Galileo, not Isaac Newton, not any of the people that you have heard of. None of them would have believed that the earth was older than 6,000 or 9,000 years old. And people that argue against the flood for the distribution of bones argue that a worldwide flood would have been too chaotic to leave layers. But that doesn't take into account the fact that the waters would have been dirty, which would have been known to leave sedimentary layers. And so Mount St. Helens, when it erupted, it left layers of lava, even though those lava layers flowed at over 100 miles an hour. And so because lava flowing at 100 miles an hour, you would think wouldn't be able to leave layers because it's moving so fast. But it contains so much dirt and junk in it that it still leaves layers. That's what happened with the flood, and that is why our earth is in very specific layers. In fact, our earth is arranged according to density. Like as if you put things in water, shake it up, and then let it settle, how will things arrange? By density. The flood lasted for about 1 year, and this model is the most simple explanation for bone graveyards and the sedimentary layers of the earth. Every single scientist that opposes the flood in the Genesis account have to use far more complex models to account for what happened. Yet, in science, the general rule of thumb is that whatever is the simplest explanation is generally the right explanation. Now, evidence against an old Earth. There is a famous dinosaur fossil dig site in Glendive, Montana, where dinosaur remains have been discovered that contain original blood vessels and cells, amongst other proteins. So we have that. Proteins, like those found in blood vessels and cells, only can last for thousands of years. Now, they can last for like 10,000 years, but they cannot last for millions of years. We say that. There's no way. And yet, we have dinosaur bones with blood vessels still in them. Also at this site, it is relatively easy to dig up fossils. And that is because sagebrush has grown and the roots basically have gone past the fossil layer into underwater streams, as plants would do. They like water. The water then leaches out of the roots as it goes through the layer where the fossils are. The plant extracts minerals from the soil for nourishment. And it would not take too long. Well, when I say too long, it would take maybe thousands of years for the plants to basically destroy all the fossil remains because it would absorb them all as nutrients. But they're still there. All the fossils are still there. There are also many other bone fragments and fossils found here belonging to non-extinct species mixed in with the extinct species. Creationists are not surprised by this at all. Evolutionists to this day have zero explanation of how that site can exist. In Dinosaur Valley in California, there are prints. I think it's in California. It might be Nevada. California. There are prints of dinosaurs walking in a straight line. No prints overlap, and there are no baby dinosaur prints. There are no short dinosaur prints like an ankylosaur or a triceratops, like dinosaurs that are short. These are all prints in a single file made by very tall dinosaurs. There is only one good explanation for why that could happen. And that would be that at the apex of the flood, the last surviving animals would be the absolute tallest of the animals. And at some point, they're walking at a place where they could only fit in a single line, trying to go up and up and up. Now, it's kind of a sad story if you think about what's happening here, so we're not going to go into that. People are going to have like Land Before Time flashbacks. But the flood waters would have rapidly deposited clay and minerals into those footprints, fossilizing those tracks, which it did do. I've now heard, well, ever since my favorite movie came out, they now have evolutionists who argue that dinosaurs have evolved into birds and that's where they all went. I mean, they don't look like birds, but this is what they say. Now, they say there is evidence of feathered dinosaurs. And in fact, now when you go to museums, this was never, when I was a kid, you never saw a dinosaur with feather. Now they have that in the museums. This is because they have found striations, or what they call stringy fibers, on the skin in certain preserved mummified remains of dinosaurs. And that's what birds have. However, follicles are required for feathers. I don't know if you've ever defeathered something, but you have to pluck feathers out, and they come out of what? Follicles, little holes. No one has ever found a follicle in dinosaur skin or bone. They actually go into the bone. They have never found that. Furthermore, if you take reptile skin, soak it in water for 1 year, it will form the same stringy fibers on the skin that birds have, which is evidence that maybe that skin was in the flood for about a year. A Tyrannosaurus rex femur bone has been found with blood vessels still intact. Fossils are not, I don't know if you know this, by the way, when people say I found a fossilized bone, there is no bone. Fossils are not bone. What fossils are is when a bone made an impression in something, the bone then disintegrated, went away, whatever, and then minerals filled up that impression and forms rock. And then when you take it out of the mud or whatever it was that the impression was made in, it looks just like the bone that was there. It's like a casting of it. That's a fossil. That's what a fossil is. It's not the bone doesn't petrify like a petrified tree or whatever. It's an impression of it, that where minerals form rocks that look like the thing. That's what a fossil is. And fossils, yeah, they're rocks in the shape of bones, but actual bones have been found. And this would be impossible for anything over several thousand years old, not to mention tissue, blood cells, vessels, and proteins that have been discovered. Evolutionists dismiss these findings and claim that they have been planted. Creationists have been accused of planting false evidence in the fossil layers. Now, there's a graph or a chart or something that you can put up there that's the original tissue throughout the fossil record. I'm not going to go through all this, but basically a few of these, like we have found salamander muscle whole and intact that they dated back to 23 million years ago. Or we have ichthyosaurs with dried skin, yet they supposedly died out in the Triassic period 251 million years ago. Like we have all these things of alive bacteria, pigmentations that are proteins and exoskeletons, sponge with still having skeleton fibers. And all these things are supposed to be over 400 million years, 20 million years, whatever ago. And yet they'll also tell you it is impossible for any of those things to last for more than several thousand years. The general time of death to dust for all physical components that we know on the earth, if it was well preserved and in the best possible way to keep conserved, is about 800,000 years, they estimate. Now, I've already said that scientists are bad at estimating things like this, but their best estimate is that something could be preserved for about 800,000 years, but not any longer than that. So any remains found have to be younger than that. Now, we believe that the earth is much younger than 800,000, but when you get into people who are talking about evolution and that, they're talking hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. And there is no way, even according to their own studies, that could be. So I mentioned that if dinosaurs existed during the time of men, they also would have to be mentioned in the Bible. So I wanted to read 3 different dinosaurs that appear in the Bible. Number 1, Behemoth. In Job 40, 15 through 24, look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now his stomach is in his hips and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. His sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. Now, I've heard people say that this is a description of a hippopotamus, and I dare you to find me a hippopotamus whose tail looks like a beam of cedar. That's ridiculous. This is clearly some massive animal that they're saying basically only God could take down. The best match to me is probably some sort of sauropod, which would be like a brachiosaur or diplodocus, something like that. But I've heard some people say it could even be more like a T-Rex that's just squatted down waiting in the river as the water rushes over to attack its prey. I don't know. We don't really know. What we know is there's a beast there that is huge and massive compared to trees. There are many artifacts in Near East culture that depict sauropods alongside humans and other animals that exist today. Leviathan. In Job 41, 1 through 23, I am not going to read this whole thing, but basically it starts off with, can you draw out Leviathan with a hook or snare his tongue in which you lower? God is talking to Job. He's like, could you deal with this animal? This guy is huge. He's powerful. He's mighty. He breathes fire. He does all this stuff. He has every part of his body is shut up like a seal. And he's got armor. And out of his mouth goes burning lights and sparks of fire. And his breath kindles coals. And flames go out of his mouth. Strength dwells in his neck. Sorrow dances before him. And, this is a massive being, this Leviathan. And he sounds an awful lot like what we depict dragons to look like. In Psalm 104:26, it says, there the ships sail about. There is that Leviathan which you have made to play there. There is evidence, not in the Bible, but in ancient texts and stuff, that there were trade routes that would be really fast to get from one place to another that people did not go because they were marked as having Leviathan in those waters. Like, what animal are they talking about? Probably not a giant squid. Old maps very often depict sea creatures that very closely match the description in Job of Leviathan. And then there's the Nakash Seraph. Now, seraph, you might recognize the plural of it if I said seraphim, which we think of as an angel. Well, the word seraph means flying creature. So seraphim means many flying creatures. Yes, that is how we named angels that were flying. What is that? Many flying creatures. And we called them seraphim. What is Nakash? Nakash means reptile. Nakash Seraph means flying reptile. In Numbers 21:6, it says, so the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Now, we translate that in English as fiery serpents. But the word is Nakash Seraph. It should be flying serpents. And many people assume that these were poisonous snakes, but there is way more evidence that these were actually flying snakes. In Isaiah 14:29, it says, do not rejoice, all of you of Philistia, because of the rod that struck you is broken. For out of the serpent's roots will come forth a viper, and its offspring will be a fiery flying serpent. And that was again the Nakash Seraph. I think that they're talking about pterosaurs. The Egyptian word seraph means flying serpent. And so they actually took it further. Seraph for them means flying serpent. Egyptian, Incan, and other cultures have strong depictions of winged serpents. And of course, dragons with wings are commonly depicted everywhere. Ancient Israelite seals have been found with winged serpents on them. And the French naturalist Pierre Bellon in 1553 wrote a book on observations in other countries, including armadillos, snakes, and flying reptiles. And he detailed an encounter with a very dangerous flying reptile located near Mount Sinai. Josephus. Has anyone heard of Josephus? So he lived from around 37 AD to 100 AD, somewhere around there. So just after Jesus' death is when he was born. And he wrote the account of Israel in books that the Antiquity of the Jews would be one of his most famous books. And it's considered to be very authoritative on history. And this is something he wrote. He said, for when the ground was difficult to be passed over because of the multitude of serpents, which it produces in vast numbers, and indeed is singular in some of those productions which other countries do not breed, as yet are worse than others in power and mischief, and an unusual fierceness of sight, some of which ascend out of the ground unseen and fly into the air, and so come upon man at unawares, and do them a mischief. I like that, do them a mischief. Moses invented, this is still from Josephus, he says, Moses invented a wonderful stratagem to preserve his army safe and without hurt. He made baskets, like unto arks, of sedge, and he filled them with ibes. Ibes is old speak for ibis birds. And he carried them along with them, which animal is the greatest enemy to serpents imaginable. For they fly from them when they come near them, and as they fly, they are caught and devoured by them, as if it was done by the hearts. But the ibes are tame creatures, and only enemies to the serpentine kind. As soon, therefore, as Moses was come to the land which was the breeder of these serpents, he let loose the ibes, and by their means repelled the serpentine kind, and used them for his assistance before the army that came upon the ground. So in other words, Moses comes, he's writing this history, something that's not necessarily in our Bible, of a time when Moses was trying to pass through an area, and it was filled with all these flying reptiles, which he goes, which other countries had the good sense not to breed? They have all these flying reptiles. And Moses comes up with the idea of taking ibis birds and releasing them, and the ibis birds go and catch all the flying reptiles and eat them. Well, from this guy in Assyria, he was the king of Assyria in 671 BC, his name was Esarhaddon, and I am sure that's not how you pronounce it. He said the same thing happened. And he wrote that in 671 BC, that the only way he could get his army across that area was to bring ibises, which he says, which I got the idea from Moses, probably from writings, to kill all the flying reptiles with ibises. Herodotus, in the 4th century BC, wrote a book about flying reptiles, corroborating Josephus' account, including that ibises kill them. And then the last dinosaur mentioned in the Bible is Ketos. In the story of Jonah, the word for what swallowed Jonah in general could mean anything living in the sea. Now, we already talked about the tanium that was mentioned in creation. But in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus goes back to that story and he uses a different word. He uses the word Ketos. And in Matthew 12, 39 through 40, it says, "But he answered and said to them, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." That word Ketos basically means sea monster. And that was the word that Jesus used when he was describing Jonah. There are other people who use the word Ketos, and when they use the word Ketos, it is always translated as sea serpent. Homer, 9th century BC. Euripides, 406 BC. Aristophanes, 400 BC. Lycophron, 250 BC. Marco Vero, 100 BC. I could go on. I've got probably 50 of them listed here. I'm not going to read them all out to you. All these famous people that we know, they use that word. We translate it as sea serpent. Jesus uses it, and we said whale. There are many places, Rome, Europe, and other places, that have modeled images and paintings of sea monsters with a dog-shaped head. And Viking ships have the same image carved into them. From all different areas of the world, the same exact looking creature. Jesus' hearers, they would have known exactly what a Ketos was. So as I wind this up, I want to ask, does a biblical worldview violate science? So I've given plenty of evidence of a young Earth based specifically and only on dinosaurs. When I did the young Earth talk 3 years ago, I did 8 different points of why we would have a young Earth. But just looking at dinosaurs, it proves that the Earth is young and that dinosaurs existed alongside people and current animals. But what about dating? Radiocarbon dating is used by archaeologists to determine the age of remnants and artifacts that they believe are thousands of years old. That's radiocarbon dating. But they refuse to use radiocarbon dating to date a fossil or a dinosaur remain. Why? Because they assume that they are millions of years old. And they say radiocarbon dating won't work on anything that old. So they switch to radioisotope dating, which only works for things millions of years old. So it's sort of like I don't know if anyone's ever used a multimeter to measure electricity. They usually have like low and high settings or something, like if it's less than 1 volt, use this setting. But if it's greater than 1 volt, you want to use this setting up to 12 volt. Beyond 12 volt, use this setting. Otherwise, it won't measure accurately. Right now they come in auto. You stick it on there, it figures it out. But you used to have to kind of set the gain on it. This is sort of like that. You have to use the right tool to measure something. And if you use the wrong tool, you don't get accurate results. Well, how can all of these scientists be wrong? It's what we said before, worldview. If they believe their starting point is that it has to be millions of years old, then they grab the wrong tool to continue their work. They get the wrong results and they continue with that. Scientists have been wrong thousands of times, including germs, wrong with the size of the universe, that the Earth was at the center of the universe, that there were only 4 elements. Currently, there is no hard evidence of evolution. It is still a theory. It still is listed as theory, but it is taught as fact. Because there is no evidence that actually supports evolution. I can't say that enough. This is 100% true, not just coming from a church pastor who wants it to be true, coming from someone who has studied and lived in the sciences and who knows that it is true. That evidence does not exist. They make up stuff, they will say stuff, but when it comes down to it, it's still a theory. Secularism prevails in science, though. And so anything that goes against that is immediately dismissed. And again, I mentioned it before, we have seen tons of people who have brought up anything contrary to evolution to support creation, or even people that say, I don't believe in God and I don't support creationism, but I have evidence that evolution is wrong, and they still are blackballed from their communities. In Matthew, Jesus had to deal with people who could not think past their own worldviews. In Matthew 9:34, it says, but the Pharisees said he casts out demons by the ruler of the demons. They could not accept that Jesus was God, but they had to come up with a reason why he could do the things he was doing. So they go, well, he must have a demon in him, giving him power to cast out demons. They couldn't get over their own worldview. And there are many examples where scientists have dated rocks to crazy results. There's another chart you can put up. These are just some of the errors that we have. So what happened is some creationists went and took rocks where we knew where they were formed. Usually when a new rock gets formed, it's because of a volcano explosion. That forms rocks. And so they would find these rocks where they know, like Mount Erebus, they got a rock from there that they're like, we know this is 17 years old. We know exactly when it erupted. We know that this rock was made. It was 17 years old. We went and got it dated, and it dated at 1.6 million years old. And then you can see on this chart, this is just a very small sampling of things that are misdone. Something that we knew was 2,100 years old gets dated at 25 million. The basalt from Mount Etna was 29 years old, got dated at 35 million years old. Like crazy results. They're not even consistent. Like one thing that we know is 37 years old gets dated at 0.7 million years. Something that's 38 years gets 2.4 million years. Like there's not even a pattern to where they're getting their bad dating from. And so, this is almost like, it was kind of a laughable moment for the Creation Research Center when they did that, or the Institution for Creation Research when they did this. But also it's sad because all their findings are just, the scientific community won't look at them. They're completely dismissed. Within the fossil records are all the evidence that you would expect to see in an Earth that is 6,000 to 7,000 years old that had a global flood. But secular scientists have to dismiss that evidence and create complex solutions to explain the evidence to support evolution. In fact, we have evolutionists that are debating each other with how to support it. They can't come up with a singular concept. It's one of the reasons why it's still a theory, is because it's not just a theory. There are like 50 theories of how it could have happened. And they each one get more and more complex. Whereas it's so simple to say God created everything, and the reason we see it all like this is because there was a global flood, and it arranged everything the way it is. It's just too simple for scientists to take, and they go, no. And if you get into like, how did the Grand Canyon form? They have complex models. Ooh, flood. No. Complex erosion with billions of years with this thing happening and that thing happening, and maybe something had to fall from space, and flood. In 2 Peter 3:3, these are the last three verses I'm going to leave you with. This was a prophecy that Peter gave. Knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts. What's the prophecy here? That people will scoff. What are they scoffing? Truth. In 2 Peter 2:1, it says, but there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who brought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. And what's the prophecy? False teachers are going to come in and teach bad things. Well, what are they going to teach? Next prophecy, 2 Peter 3, 5 through 6. For this they willfully forget, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. They will forget the age of the earth, and they will forget that we had a global flood. The prophecy Peter gave is that people will make fun of people who believe the truth, and they're going to teach false lies that the earth is a different age than God said it is, and that there was never a flood. And that's the prophecy. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is what is killing our school kids. This is what is killing people who aren't arming their kids with this kind of knowledge. And when they come from school and they ask, why does my school say this and the church says this? And we don't go, I don't know, just have faith and believe that God is right. We can give real evidence. I don't expect that every one of you will memorize everything I just said and remember it. Although I will, sometime tomorrow, have the PDF of all my notes online that you can get from our website. But the point is to know that this knowledge exists and it can be found in books, so that if someone comes and talks to you about it, whether a child, whether someone from our church, whether a stranger, whether a friend, we have resources that we can point you to go, this is how you answer them. And so that is how dinosaurs fit into the Bible. Let's pray. Father, we give you all glory and honor because you are worthy to be praised. You are exalted high above, and we know that you are the master of everything. We thank you that you left us with the evidence of everything that we would need to study your creation and to know the truth of what you've given to us. So Lord, we exalt you, we bless you, and we praise your name. Amen.